Welcome to this virtual commemoration of the Veterans History Project's 20th anniversary to highlight the veterans, volunteers, and organizations who have made VHP the amazing repository it is today. This is the last of our three panels, each illuminating a core group, and today we'll focus on the veterans. I'm Karen Lloyd, the director of the Veterans History Project under the American Folklife Center here at the Library of Congress, and a retired Army aviator. I'm also the daughter, sibling, and widow of veterans. Milestone events are a perfect time to reflect on where we've been and how we plan to move forward. And while 2020 certainly isn't what most of us were envisioning in January, there are still ways to connect and celebrate important milestones. This year is not only the Veteran History Project's 20th anniversary, but this year also marks 75 years since the end of World War II. On April 18, 1942, 16 U.S. Army Air Corps B-25 Mitchell bombers launched from the deck of the USS Hornet to embark on a dangerous and secret mission on the Japanese mainland in retribution for the attack on Pearl Harbor. Each man on the crew, including squadron leader Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle, volunteered for the mission, knowing that they might never return home. Whether it originated with Doolittle or was simply good writing in the books and pop culture that portray him, Doolittle is often quoted saying, "There is nothing stronger than the heart of a volunteer." I've seen firsthand that the spirit of this quote is alive and well with the volunteers who contribute to the Veterans History Project. They are the heart of what we do and the reason for our success. In a few moments, you will learn more from some of the individuals from across the country and organizations they represent who have graciously dedicated themselves in service to make a lasting difference with every contribution. Since 2009, Jonathan Bickel, a teacher from Eastern Lebanon County High School, has been working with his students to document history, one veteran at a time. The son of a World War II B-24 navigator, Jonathan participated in the Library of Congress and History Channel's National Teach-In in October 2009. Since then, he has provided an authentic learning experience for his students, even bringing his class to Washington every year so they can see firsthand where their collections of primary resources will be held and to share their experiences with the VHP staff. I had the honor of meeting with Mr. Bickel's class on more than one occasion and am consistently impressed by their accomplishments and what they chose to share about their experience. It is my great pleasure to introduce an innovative educator and moderator for today's panel about what it is like to volunteer and contribute to the Veterans History Project. A hearty welcome to Mr. Jonathan Bickel and all of our amazing panelists.
Thank you, Colonel Lloyd. It is truly my honor to be here today. I would also like to thank Ms. Monica Mahindra, Head of Programming, Communication, and Coordination, Ms. Carrie Ward, Liaison Specialist, and the rest of the VHP staff for sponsoring this panel. As Colonel Lloyd said, my father was a World War II veteran in the 467th Bomb Group, 790th Squadron, and at the age of 84, he happened to be snowmobiling, and it was during an ice storm, and he kind of caught a runner, and he fell off, and he broke his ribs and his pelvis. He was taken to the hospital. It was a long journey back when he first started taking his first steps. Unfortunately, it dislodged a blood clot and called a pulmonary embolism to his lungs, and it didn't look good. And it basically, if it wouldn't be for the miraculous doctors and the blood clot drug TPA, he wouldn't have survived, but he did. So I was fortunate, and I had a second chance to record my father's legacy for the Library of Congress through the oral history of the Veterans History Project. And then after realizing how important it was to me and my family to interview him, I soon realized how important it was to my local community and my fellow teachers and my students in the Eastern Lebanon County School District. And so several teachers, Dottie Knoll, Amy Weddle, Donald Delcola, we got together and we formed our first student panel who interviewed our veterans. And then we've been continuing for about the last 10 years. And then 2 years ago, my daughter was a ninth grader, and I had the opportunity to have her in class, and she interviewed her grandfather. and it was quite an honor to me as an educator, but also to my family. And so it was great knowing that she really understood the sacrifices that these World War II veterans made. So I hope today those of you tuning in, we have some wonderful panelists who know the meaning of volunteering for this great project. And I hope you don't wait as long as I did and wait for a second chance moment like I did. But I'm very thankful to Congress and President Clinton for signing VHP to law in the year 2000. And it's pretty amazing the progress that this project has made. In fact, from its genesis to today, there are over 111,000 collections from veterans and Gold Star family members, ranging from World War I through current conflicts. And while this number is incredibly impressive, according to the VA, there are estimates that there are over 19 million veterans of the United States today. And in order to ensure every veteran and Gold Star family member has an opportunity to participate, VHP's grassroots efforts needs the help from volunteers just like you or me to help establish veteran collections through our National Library. Today, we are fortunate to have 4 volunteer veteran interview gurus with us to share tips as well as what their experiences were like. In no particular order, I'd like to first introduce Ms. Carol Fowler, the National Guard Militia Museum of New Jersey Center for U.S. War Veterans Oral Histories Director and the museum's assistant curator. Ms. Fowler was born in Jersey City and is a graduate of the College of St. Elizabeth. After having a family, she returned to Brookdale Community College to take history classes and ended up doing work as an associate producer for a college television show titled Triumphant Spirit Series, America's World War II Generation Speaks. She then began conducting veteran interviews with history mentor Paul Zygo and his project, the Center for World War II Studies and Conflict Resolution. She was hired to help establish an oral history program at the National Guard Militia Museum of New Jersey in 2001. Since then, Ms. Fowler has conducted over 600 interviews with veterans from World War II to the present. On May 31st, 2019, the VHP collection grew thanks to the help of Mr. Jonas Ross, who used VHP for his Eagle Scout project. He achieved this promotion in January of 2020. It is important to note that the Eagle Scout is the highest achievable rank in the Scouts program and that only 4% of Scouts earn this rank. Mr. Ross's project was also named the Boy Scouts of America Caw District's Eagle Scout Project of the Year. In school now, Jonas hopes to get involved in ROTC and eventually be a fixed-wing pilot in the U.S. Army. Our third panelist is Ms. Susan Kahlo. She is an applied anthropologist and ethnographer who has lived and conducted original research in the Netherlands, Peru, and the United States. Her most recent project, collecting and recording life histories of U.S. veterans from World War II to present for the National Park Service's Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield Park, has led to an ongoing commitment to interview veterans for the Veterans History Project. Past projects using anthropological methods engaged the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Forest Service in Juneau, Alaska, and included projects related to business problem solving. She holds an MA in anthropology from Georgia State University, an MA in Spanish from University of Tennessee, and an MBA from Thunderbird School of Global Management. Lastly, we have Mr. Jeff Meek. Jeff began doing World War II veteran oral histories for the project in fall of 2006. Over time, he branched out into obtaining the stories of Korean War, Vietnam War, War on Terror, and peacetime veterans, male and female. Thus far, Meek has contributed 361 stories to the project, all of which were published in the Hot Springs Voice Village newspaper, where Meek began as a part-time columnist, staff writer, and climbed the ranks to become managing editor, a position he has since retired from as of September 2019. He currently lives with his wife, Jean, in Aubrey, Texas. Thank you, panelists, for being here. I would love to kick things off by asking each of you to briefly share how you started conducting veteran interviews. Susan, can we start with you?
Nice question. I've always collected stories and been interested in firsthand stories, as my background shows. But how I got started with the Veterans History Project was when I returned from Alaska, Kennesaw Mountain Battlefield. They had a small grant somebody had written, and the objective was to interview veterans from World War II to present, with the idea of comparing and contrasting the experiences of a soldier, tracing with Civil War to present, because they do education. That's what happens at the Visitor Center and at the Park Service. So the chief interpreter, Marjorie Thomas, who I work closely with, the instructions, it just appealed to me. It wasn't just to sit down and get somebody's history. It was to get a diverse group of people, talk about emotions, things that kids in a middle school to high school could relate to. So that was the idea. So kind of the opposite of what you're doing. We had that in mind because school kids come. And so even though the questions could have been wide open, I did have a little bit, I'd give a little bit of direction for how people communicated. For example, letter writing, as opposed to now they can do FaceTime, from abroad. What was important, relationships, why they went, what happened when they came back, what skills did they learn that they were taken to civilian life. But so that was how it started, but I really had to kind of as I told Carrie, part of the goal at the end of the project was to share the collections with the Library of Congress. So I, as a researcher, went straight to the Library of Congress website, and when I found all the amazing resources, I used that as my beginning guide. So I started out with all the requirements, the paperwork, so that everything was being done with that goal. So it was I just found it amazing. And I interviewed from World War II to present, and I just loved it. Number one, my father was a Navy in World War II as well, and I did not interview him. He passed away before, but I plan to go back now because I have some recording. But anyway, I got started with the project. Carrie Ward was amazing as far as her patience with my questions, and just encouraging me all the way through there. And it was just so rewarding. And I would say we also conducted workshops to train other volunteers, and that was my idea, to hand it over. So when we finished it in 2018, we handed it over and trained about 50 volunteers. And I found out 9 months later nobody was doing it. So I jumped back in, and I'm hooked. This is I love doing it. It's in everything I enjoy doing, and it's also, I feel, getting at the Library of Congress. I think that for me, I just really appreciate the significance of that and the professionalism, but also that's one part of it. The other part is when I did the interviews, I didn't just interview the veterans. I got to know their families, go to their homes, and hear reactions from the children, which is something that I find a lot of veterans think no one's interested in their story. And I did a presentation on who's listening when you tell your story. I've given that at senior centers and different senior different meetings. But anyway, so I got started through the Park Service. I'm still working as a volunteer to the Park Service, anything related to veterans. And I will interview anyone. I'll go in there. COVID slowed me down a bit, but that's how I got into it, and I plan to continue this as long as I can.
Hey, well, thank you very much, Susan. Hey, that's fantastic. Hey, Jeff, how about you? How did you get started interviewing veterans?
Well, it all started when our son joined the Marine Corps in 1996. And that prompted my wife and I to want to know more about what our fathers did in World War II. Jane's father was part of Bradley's 1st Army Headquarters Company and came across Omaha Beach on D+3. My father was a little bit younger. He ended up in the Army of Occupation in Italy, where they guarded the Morgan Line, which was a temporary border between Yugoslavia, Austria, and Italy, while the brass figured out a permanent border. And I had already been studying World War II for several years before that, but when I would meet a World War II veteran, saying thank you just wasn't cutting it for me. So I thought, what else could I do? And we had a video camera about this big back in the day. And so I would record their story. And I started doing that when we lived in Illinois in 2004. We both retired from education in 05 and moved to Hot Springs Village, Arkansas, a retirement community. And I thought, there's going to be World War II veterans there, so you might still be doing some of this interviewing. Well, in 06, we took a 17-day trip to Europe and toured battle sites and beaches and so on and so forth, and we came home. And my wife, Jean, is very active in the Daughters of the American Revolution, and she came home from a meeting one day. This is late 2006, and she said, have you ever heard of the Veterans History Project? And I said, no. And she said, well, our DAR chapters want to get involved with that. They're looking for somebody to interview veterans, and seeing as you've done some of that, I volunteered you. Oh, okay. So Hot Springs Village, Arkansas, per capita has more veterans than any place in the state of Arkansas. I mean, from 3-star generals to private first class. And, we'd only lived there a year or so. I didn't know that many people, but we have a very nice veterans memorial with the memorial bricks. So I'd go over there with a phone book and I'd look at these names, and if I saw a name on a brick and I saw it in the phone book, I wrote their name and number down and just started making some calls. And the first guy I interviewed barely survived the Battle of the Bulge. The second guy was at the Nuremberg trials. The third guy firebombed Tokyo, and I'm like, oh my God, this is the stuff I've been reading about for over a decade. And now I'm sitting 10 feet away recording their stories. And as I'm sure the other volunteers know, it's contagious. And it absolutely changed my life. I woke up one morning and I thought, I wonder if the newspaper would be interested in these stories, because it's just the guy next door. They don't talk about it. And so I contacted the newspaper and asked them, would you be interested in World War II stories for the newspaper? And they said, yes, but we won't pay you. We'll do it once a month. It's a weekly paper. And you have a word limit. Okay. So I wrote the first one in January of 07. And by April, the phone was ringing off the hook at the newspaper office at our house. And for the next, what would that be? Next 12 years, I had a list. I still had a list when we left Hot Springs Village. And it led to a newspaper career. I went from once a month columnist to twice a month to staff writer to senior reporter to managing editor. And I met so many terrific people, like I'm sure the rest of the volunteers and those of you in Washington have. It's just life-changing. I mean, when you sit 10 feet away from a 80-year-old who's crying like an 8-year-old all those years later, it changes you.
Hey, well, thank you very much, Jeff, for that answer and for what you're doing. Carol, how did you get started interviewing veterans?
I got started as an intern, and I worked with Professor Paul Zygo and the Brookdale Community College TV department, and we interviewed veterans on their TV station. I would be in the green room mostly taking notes for Paul, as well as I started very low on the totem pole, you would say. I would be outside in the parking lot holding the parking pass for the veteran to make sure he was squared away. I made sure it happened, and I was so happy when I was actually given associate producer credit for that as a volunteer intern. Then he sent me to where I've been working. I'm in my 20th year there, the National Guard Museum in Seagirt, New Jersey, right on the beach there. And I would, you're told as a veteran, say yes to anything that comes along because you don't know where it will lead. And 3 months into that internship, I was asked, how would you like to start interviewing veterans part-time for the state of New Jersey? And I said, I would love it. And in fact, I already knew that I wanted to interview veterans because I had met one at a mass. I used to be a Renew 2000 leader, and for my parish, and there was one man in the room filled with women at an assisted living place. He was very gruff. He had a newspaper tucked under his arm, and he was very unhappy. And I walked up to him, and he said, "Do you know who I served with?" And I said, "Someone famous?" And he said, "How did you know?" And he said, "It was Jimmy Stewart, the actor." And this was a Jersey City fireman, Tom Fahey, and I'll never forget him. He changed my life, basically. He taught me that I have this passion for interviewing veterans. And so when the opportunity came along, when my museum curator asked me, I actually patterned the name of my project after Paul Zygo's Center for World War II Studies and Conflict Resolution, which I had volunteered on that panel with him. And I named mine the Center for U.S. War Veterans Oral Histories. And I started with 2 other part-timers, and I'm the last person standing. So that's my story.
Hey, that's a great story, Carol. Thank you so much. Hey, and how about Jonas? How did you first start getting involved with interviewing veterans?
Yes, sir. So when I achieved the rank of Life Scout in my Boy Scout troop, the main thing to come up was the project. When you think of the project, people normally build a bench or fix some houses, but I wanted to do something that could be seen by more people than in just my community. And that's when my mom told me about the Veterans History Project. She's a friend from college who actually works in Washington, D.C. and is a big fan of the Veterans History Project. And when I heard about it, I thought it was just perfect. So, wow. That's basically how I got started, I guess.
Hey, that's fantastic, Jonas. And I still have another question for you. The Scouts have a unique connection to our U.S. military since World War I, where they served as coast watchers and message runners. In 1942, President Roosevelt made the Boy Scouts the official dispatch bearers to inform and inspire civilians on the home front through World War II distribution posters. Jonas, you did an amazing job bridging the Scouts back to those military roots. You kind of said why you found out about it, but what did you learn about the Veterans History Project from doing it?
It's a very good question. Well, what did I learn? I feel like I learned there's more to history than just what you read in textbooks. Because when you read something, you're like, oh, that's just the facts, but you never learn the actual personal experience of what soldiers did or how they felt or what they did during that time. So that's something I definitely learned from this experience.
Okay. Hey, thank you very much. So this question's for the group. I understand that many of you chose to establish a collection for family members. Did you find it better to interview someone you know or someone you haven't before? Carol, would you like to answer that, please?
I would say definitely it would be strangers. And that's part of my spiel when I go around and give talks and try to recruit people to sign up. I would say that I am nobody. I am a third person party. You're not affecting me. I know that you don't talk about your story because you don't want to hurt your family members and to burden them, but you're not burdening me. And if you tell your story to me, I can record it. And that's how these stories come out that the family members have never heard before. It truly is remarkable that I can't even tell you how many have told me that they were never aware of the stories until they sat in the room and got to hear, let's say, a Merchant Marine veteran who his job after the war was to transport the German POWs back to Germany. He was so shocked to hear that. His elderly father just had never spoken about it. They came home and they got on with their lives. They got married, they bought a house, they started their families, they got jobs. And they didn't really talk about their stories. They didn't sit around with other veterans and war stories back then. So now they have us, and we're so proud and honored to be able to achieve that for them.
Thank you very much, Carol. Would anybody else like to answer that question? Okay, then I'm going to move on then. So, Jeff, you started with World War II veterans and then graduated to other conflicts and eras. Can you speak to the differences you noticed in these interviews? Any advice to someone who is working with different branches or era veterans?
No, I would say that, and maybe some of the rest of you has experienced this, you know, none of them ever think their story is worth telling once you can finally get them to tell it. And you just need to be patient. There were some people that I finally got to interview that had unbelievable stories, some of them horrific, that I first approached them 2 years before we actually did the story. And over that period of time, I would develop a relationship with these people. And some of them, we got so close that I remember one World War II veteran, he crossed over the bridge at Remagen. Once he called me to see if I could come over and fix his air conditioner. So, I mean, it went well beyond the military thing, but I don't think anything in particular based on which war or conflict. You just need to be patient. What I did notice after we had done almost a couple hundred World War II veterans, a lot of the Vietnam veterans in the town that I lived, Hot Springs Village, Arkansas, we started to hear rumblings of, well, why isn't Jeff interviewing us? And I knew that day would come, and I was leery because that's certainly not a feel-good war. And we kicked the whole thing off when I started doing those. We organized a parade at which I spoke, and we had a 2-star Army general, Major General Tom Arwood, gave a talk, and then we fed them. And so to know how much food we needed, we asked people to register. And I'll never forget that 2 of the first 4 calls were what I feared. And that was, no blanket parade's gonna assuage my feelings. Click. These were Vietnam vets. And, you know, it was also kind of touchy because, at least in my opinion, Vietnam veterans, they don't like politicians involved. And I had politicians contacting me who wanted to be in the parade. And I told them no. Where do you want me in the parade? And I said, you could stand over on the sidewalk like everybody else. And of course, with them, that went over like a lead balloon. But I knew how they felt. And I didn't want to do something to ruin the experience for them. But that's a long-winded answer. But I think you just need to be patient. Remember, a tunnel rat in Vietnam told me it's probably the most gruesome story I ever heard. It took a while to get him to tell it. But when he told it, and this is the case with several others, he told it all. And even for me, it was hair-raising.
Hey, thank you very much, Jeff. That's some great advice. And so we're going to move on here. So many of you have interviewed many veterans, and you kind of have alluded to it already as to where you find these veterans. But if there's somebody new thinking about interviewing a veteran after watching this panel, where is a good place to find those veterans, and where would you recommend that they look? And this is open to anyone. So how about Jeff? Go ahead.
Well, I think I mentioned that I went to a Veterans Memorial that had names there and took a phone book to see if they were still in the village, still alive, and so on. I think you could go to a VFW Hall or American Legion Hall. I met veterans at parades. Those would be my suggestions.
Hey, thank you. Susan, would you like to answer too?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on kind of, that ties in a little bit, which I didn't respond on the first time about strangers or knowing people, but when the park, these battlefields, it's a natural, I reached out to other people when I was first trying to identify veterans to interview through university and places to get a referral, because I found if I just walked up, I had difficulty. If I just walked up to someone, it was more difficult to say when I interview you. But the Kennesaw Mountain itself attracts, there are so many veterans that come there and are walking and hiking and part of the trail club. And that's where I started. But and then what I wanted to say, being a stranger, not being a veteran myself, I really sort of played that up, because if it's the first time somebody's opening up, they feel a little bit more comfortable, because it's not like I already know, they don't have to do jargon and all. And so that was sort of the way I started. And the way I've been getting them has been more referral. One to tell another one. You ought to talk to Susan. I don't hit on sensitive, I tell them I won't try to dig for sensitive stories. But as Jonas pointed out, they come up because they get comfortable talking. And it's something, that's happening more and more. So I think finding the veterans, for me, it's been a referral to senior centers. There's a Cobb County Senior Center that works with veterans, and some of the organizations, the schools. I've tried to reach out for, even just recently with some of the Free Red Cross and those people at work. But I find it helps to have somebody else encourage, if it's their first time, especially. And then, because I feel like it's really important just to get them to start to talk. And then I think that feeling of, I think it makes them feel better. And then they turn around and tell you need to talk. So that's what's happening now, is veterans are telling their friends, you need to talk. And then I'll make them comfortable. But like I said, the stories come up. But I have had trouble, or to just go straight up to somebody right off is harder for me. But I'm learning. Hopefully getting better at that.
Hey, well, thank you so much, Susan. I appreciate that answer. And Susan, I have another question for you. So Kennesaw participated in an oral history workshop, which involved several volunteers. I understand that you and Carol have both had the opportunity to work individually and in a group capacity. Can you speak to the benefits and potential challenges to this? Susan, if you can start off, please.
Okay. You mean the workshop that Carrie helped coordinate, and then we had 2 workshops, and a historian came?
Yes, that's correct.
At that workshop, we tried to get 25, and we ended up with 50. That's why we did the 2 days. And we had a range of people, from individuals to Delta Airlines, their museum, aviation, universities. We had a lot of people. And I went with one of my interviewees, a Vietnam veteran, and he's kind of been one of my biggest advocates. He wants to talk. So he came with me, and we talked with the volunteers. And then we had the materials, the kits that were provided from the library, from the Veterans History Project, and gave those out. And people came from different, there were different backgrounds and perspectives, but it was I think it was well done. I think maybe some people continue doing interviews that maybe I don't know about, but the response, and that was again through Kennesaw Mountain, just through their big circle of they have hundreds of volunteers for the trails. So it was not really related, but because of veterans, the topic pulled a lot of people together. Children of veterans, So I don't know if I hope that answers your question, but that was my experience. It was really good.
Yeah, that was terrific. Hey, thank you. And Carol, how about you?
Hi. Yes, I work with volunteer interns from different colleges in my vicinity, and what I do is I schedule them, and sometimes we go to an assisted living facility and spend the entire day there. And the social director will have everyone lined up and scheduled, and all of the forms filled out. So I'm very lucky to have my volunteer assistants with me on those days. Other times I really need them for technical know-how, as far as aircraft, the different models of aircraft. I know personally that I have an F-4 Phantom jet in my field across from my museum, but other than that, I can't really identify ships or aircraft as well as my actually my male assistant, Bill Elwell. And also to have a male voice asking the question of someone who's very hard of hearing, that helps too. Even though I can project my voice, it still is not the timbre that they need sometimes. And you think about the memorabilia, we have an entire table with everything that they brought spread out. So I need help. I can't run the interview, take notes, film it, and also be able to figure out what am I about to hold up in front of the camera? What picture that he brought goes with this part of the story? Sometimes the veteran will walk in with a memoir, which you wish you had before the interview to help prepare. So I would give that to my intern and say, could you read through this and give the questions from this memoir? And because I can't now, we're out of time, so I need you to jump in and do this. What other? Oh, the 4-H students I worked with, we filmed and the students did the interviews. So it was years ago, it was in the early 2000s. So they came with their families and we paired them up with Freehold VFW veterans. Each one had one. One family brought a binder for an ex-POW of World War II, filled with everything you can imagine that they printed out. They used an entire cartridge off their printer, they said, just making this binder, and he was overwhelmed by it. It was 2 brothers and a little sister and their mom who worked on it, and the 2 brothers did the interview. And now they're about 30 years old, but back then they were around 10 or so, or maybe 11 or 12, not much older than that. So that was very rewarding. What we would do is teach them how to do the interview, how to do the introduction, how to do the wrap up, what questions to ask. And also to not read like a script, but to listen to what you're being told. And then maybe you'll do a follow-up question based on what their answer just was. It might not be what your next question would have been. That's how it worked with the children.
Hey, that's wonderful, Carol. And I'm going to try and practice some advice. So you mentioned preparation. So many of you have conducted many of these interviews. So how many of you, what is the best practice for you to prepare as far as research to get ready for the interview? How many of these interviews do you spend a lot of time preparing for? Whereas how many, the veteran kind of, okay, walks in and here you go, let's sit down and conduct this interview. Would anybody like to answer that question? Jeff, go ahead.
Having studied World War II for a decade was a big help because I knew a lot of where the divisions were and some of the battles they were in. In fact, that fellow that I mentioned that wanted me to fix his air conditioner, I remember when I interviewed him, he talked about going across Elsenborn Ridge, and he said, have you ever heard of it? I said, I've been to Elsenborn Ridge, and we were immediately friends for life. But probably 150 or so interviews into doing this, I would send the veteran an email confirming the time and date and location, which was in the beginning was the veteran's home, but I got tired of barking dogs and telephones ringing and so on, so we ended up doing the rest at my house. I would ask them for their unit, places they served, and then from that I would do research if I didn't know much. I didn't know nearly as much about Vietnam, for example, as I did about World War II. So I would elicit information from them. I'd ask for that at least a week before we interviewed. And that helped a lot.
Okay. Hey, thank you very much, Jeff, for that answer. So we're talking about the interviews, and can any of you share some of either the challenging moments during an interview or maybe some of the rewarding, memorable moments you've had during these interviews or relationships with the veterans? Jonas, I'm gonna ask you. Have you had any challenging moments during these interviews? Or can you think of any rewarding or memorable experiences that you've had while conducting these interviews?
Yes, sir. Well, one thing that at least I think I kind of struggled with is sometimes they were very quiet and I wasn't able to hear them. And maybe I feel like that's probably something on my bad that I should have, I guess, had a better environment, or maybe I just didn't hear as much as they said. But it was definitely rewarding to see, as I said earlier, the experiences of being in a war or being just in a fighting zone that these soldiers have experienced. It was really amazing seeing history that I've studied and learned through a different perspective. That was definitely the most rewarding thing for me, sir.
All right. Hey, thank you, Jonas. I appreciate that. Would anybody else like to answer that question? Jeff, go ahead.
I think some of the challenges are when the veteran really loses it, when they really break down. And, what do you say? What do you do? And I would try to make them as comfortable as possible and say, take your time. And I would tell them before we started that we'll talk about what you're comfortable talking about. I think that's important. I've had some other people that I mentioned I did some interviews with, and they asked me the dumb stuff that you don't ask, like how many people did you kill and that kind of thing. So, when you're in the midst of a conversation and all of a sudden there's this dead silence for 30 seconds, that can be distracting. I would pay attention to their face because sometimes I could just see them drift off, their eyes. I remember I interviewed a Pearl Harbor survivor on the USS West Virginia, and he was in a communications room, and when the West Virginia was hit, all this oil started pouring in through the ceiling vents. And when he told me that, he went like this, and it was still real. And so you just kind of have to wait them out, remind them that, we'll talk about what you're comfortable talking about. Like I said in the beginning when I did the interviews, the challenges were interruptions. A wife who'd come in and wanted to know if we wanted any more coffee, or a dog, or a telephone, or things like that. But I got past that when I just started doing them at home and hid all the telephones in the other end of the house and went about it that way.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. Susan, would you like to answer?
Yes, I'm going to go back because I haven't been doing it that long. So when I was doing one of the first interviews, because I was doing it myself, I would take a recorder and a video camera, set everything up. And so, but one of the challenges when I went to a First Lieutenant Marine, Jim Bly, who'd been in the Vietnam War, I went to his home and met his wife, and then went in his office, and he sat at his desk, and I did not prepare other than his paperwork. So I did have that. My goal again was to try to just get stories that we were sharing for kids. So that was, I didn't go in there with anything really prepared other than trying to kind of, get some just personal experiences. But anyway, so one of the challenges, number one, other than even technical, like you said, my camera went off and we had to stop. But it was the first time that Jim had participated, had done an interview talking. He did, his radio man did step on a landmine, one of the first ones, and then he also, about 7 of them were blown up. He did lose a leg. And, when he started talking, he was getting choked up. I was getting choked up. So I think the hard part was also controlling myself. I mean, you do tear up and it's sometimes difficult, but I think in the moment, it's such a, when you're there and you're listening and you're in the moment with that person, you pull through it. And I listened, and Jim, we got into funny stories, and the fact that what was so amazing was he kept talking about the men who pulled him out of the field and took him, because he was within 30 minutes on an operating table. And then he said those guys went back in and they didn't make it back out. So when I asked for photos, he always wanted me to include the pictures of these other guys that didn't make it back. And he started, so even though there were tears, it would turn into laughter, because he said if he hadn't been wounded, he might not have been alive. And he's happily married and 4 children, and he's had a very big career with UPS. And so I think that I learned a lot. That was one of the first interviews. It was difficult, challenging. Everything went wrong. It could have, but it also was right in that we just let it flow. The camera, we went in and out of the camera, but he was one of the ones that once he talked, he just said it was like it just was a relief to talk. And he's now writing and giving, encouraging other veterans. But I think when you're starting, you really don't know, as Stuart Jones, everybody else has found out, you don't know what's going to happen. And I think just listening to somebody's story is, you just have to be prepared for whatever will happen. So I don't really overly prepare as far as trying to know, other than I prepare by talking with the family, health issues, things like that, just to make sure I'm being as considerate. But I think that emotional, when someone's telling a story, it's something that's really kind of a challenge of what to do, but get through it. It's worth it. It's worth it. Don't shy away from it.
Thank you very much, Susan. I appreciate that. Okay, so we're going to go to our next question, and this is for everybody. Each of you came to the table with a unique skill set. Susan, you had anthropology and ethnography. Jeff was a writer who researched World War II, given his father's connection. Carol came to it from a TV perspective, and Jonas had family members' guidance. What skills do you think are useful to conducting oral histories or working with veterans to establish collections? Let's start with Carol. Go ahead.
The skill that is the most important is that of listening. You need to be a good listener. You need to be comfortable with emotion. There has to be a mutual respect. While the veteran is going through something emotional, what you do is you leave the camera running, but if he mentions that his buddy died, you say, "I'm so sorry." You show empathy. But unless he says, "Could you stop that?" Of course you would stop it, because you're not Barbara Walters. You don't want to make them cry. But you want the family to remember this is a legacy for the family. And this is the only time maybe the family's really seeing the impact of what their loved one went through and how much it affects them. And it will help the family understand why they were never told. Well, let's say that the veteran passes away before the family even sees the DVD, which of course has happened before. And then they will understand what happened. And also I wanted to say that I had a Vietnam Marine too, John Edgar, who passed away. I've talked at his wake last December. He died suddenly of a massive heart attack. And I hadn't seen his wife in many years. He was a veteran from 2003. But his story is one that I used to speak about when I would go to the One Stop Career Center in Neptune, New Jersey, is for unemployed homeless veterans. And I would be asked to talk to try to recruit veterans to speak. And I would say that there was a veteran who never talked about the war. He never went to any memorials. He didn't even tell his wife until he left my museum and called her on the phone and was crying and finally told her. So keep in mind that Vietnam is a part of them, whether they choose to acknowledge that or not. And by interviewing, you are reuniting them with that part of them. And not only that, I hold a luncheon every year for my year's worth of participants. And what I did was through internet research, I do a ton of research before I schedule the interview. I met an attorney from California who had been looking for this veteran, John Edgar, for 37 years, and who had been running Northeast reunions. So he invited Vietnam Marines from Maryland, from Pennsylvania, from New Jersey, New York, Connecticut. He invited them to my luncheon, which was 3/4 World War II people who didn't know what was going on. But there was a big reporter there, and it's funny that his photo was him in front of a relic lifeboat. And it's like, we helped save him. He was reunited with his best friend's father, his best friend who was killed, who he was put in charge of at Parris Island because Tom Scanlon was actually too short to be a Marine, and he got a congressional waiver to enlist in the Marines. So I found his father online, and I invited him down. So that story, you can only imagine how memorable it is and how remarkable he was and is. And I'm getting chills right now talking about him. And what an honor it was for me to speak at his wake to all of his hockey buddies. Who knew that he played 200 hockey games a year and was the hockey goalie all over New Jersey? So I just had to share that story. And if I can just share, Terry Fearon was a Vietnam CB who, when he stood up from the interview, he said, the Gold Star should have this. And sure enough, they didn't have it. The Library of Congress did not include Gold Star families at the time. And so he lobbied our rep, Chris Smith, to make it happen. And now he's the assistant to the president of the New Jersey American Gold Star. I have it written down somewhere. The New Jersey Department of American Gold Star Mothers. He lines up their December holiday meeting every year at his VFW. He helped them get a New Jersey specialized license for their vehicles. He helped establish the monument for the Gold Star families at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Homedale, New Jersey. He helped dedicate a bridge in Brielle to the veterans of all wars. And he listens to and supports the Gold Star mothers. And he's the reason that I met Carrie Ward, and we're BFFs now.
Hey, thank you. That was a tremendous answer. And, listening, we definitely know how important that is as part of the interview process. How about Susan? Besides listening, what important skills do you think are necessary to conducting these oral histories?
Record keeping, becoming your organization. I think because what does start happening, I'm pretty good at documenting, because I know that one thing, you'll go back to it and there'll become connections. And, as I'm listening to y'all's stories, the more I'm interviewing, the more I start finding connections between people, other things I want to reach out to. But I keep pretty meticulous records as far as I keep track of their birth dates. Sometimes I'll even reach out and say a happy birthday to people, family members, and materials they give me. I keep a file as well, and digital. I'm really good with the digital technology because I'm so mobile. I'm kind of a moving target, so for me, it's a natural. But I like redundancy. You don't want to lose things when people give you the records. So I would say, as far as if someone's starting to do, I encourage anyone to, if they're interested in the interviewing. Sometimes people, I find, get afraid just of the paperwork, and it's really not that bad to just make. They can do. It doesn't have to be even on a computer. But the Veterans History Project gives you the paperwork. But I think you do need some organization, because I don't know about others. In my case, well, I think Jonas said, not Jonas, the journalist, is that sometimes you might be working for months or years, and then circle back around to interview somebody. So I keep those records, so then I am prepared, for going in, or I help them put paperwork together. So that's just a technical part, but I think it's important, because that way you can focus when you do get the chance to do the interview. You can relax and listen, and if you have help like interns and things, which I will work on after this COVID thing. It'd be great to pull more people in, but so I would say one of those things, and that is something I was trained to do way back, but also before I did field work in ethnography, I worked under American history professors who were authors, and I learned way back how important it was to keep notes and just keep good records of everybody, because I've done some second interviews of the same people. I don't know if that's some people that have asked me to come back because they want to add something or talk more about something, and so I've done that. So that's just that's piece, because I think the same version.
All right. Hey, Thank you very much, Susan. I appreciate that. Hey, Jeff, besides listening and being organized, what skills do you think are important to conducting the interviews?
Besides those two, and I'm sorry I couldn't hear Susan very well, it kept cutting in and out, so excuse me if I'm being redundant, but, and I've mentioned this before, it's just patience. Give them an opportunity to talk. Silence for a few seconds is okay. Let them gather their feelings and their thoughts. I think listening, patience, and knowledge are the, you know your subject, because if you don't, it'll show up in the interview and they'll notice that you don't know what point to hawk is. For example, if you're interviewing a guy who climbed the cliffs, which was the second interview I ever did. If I can, I'd like to mention just real briefly about the paperwork. I think I heard Susan talking about paperwork, I think.
Yes.
I had mentioned that I sent out an email asking them a few questions so I can get their unit and so on and so forth. And in that email, I would ask for some of the information that's on the paperwork. I'd have 70% of that done before they showed up. And then I would have, ask them questions to fill in the blanks and also to verify what I thought was what should be put on the paperwork. So I think you can get a sizable portion of that done before you ever sit down with the veteran.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. Jonas, what skills do you think are important for conducting the interviews besides patience, organization, and listening?
Thank you, sir. Well, unfortunately, all those ideas that I had for that question were already said. But I feel like a really good one that can help the veteran feel that you're actually, I guess, listening, be more organized, is being good at follow-up questions. Because if you just go by the script and they feel like you're just reading off something, they don't feel like they can actually open up to you and relate to you in their experiences. But I feel like if you can ask and actually listen to what they're saying and ask follow-up questions, they can feel better and tell you more of their experiences, sir.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Jonas. Jeff, I understand you are also a retired teacher, yay, and more recently, a retired columnist writer. What advice would you give to educators wanting to participate in the project versus writers?
Well, I don't know. I have to give that one some thought. I don't know that there is a real big difference, because to do the interview, you have to have that knowledge to conduct a good interview, and you need to be patient and let them talk and listen. I don't know how else to answer that, Jonathan. I'm sorry. I think whether you're a teacher or a writer, the requirements are the same. You got to know what you're talking about. You got to be a good listener, and you got to let them talk. Just be quiet and let them talk.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, this is for everybody, or actually Carol and Susan. Did anyone partner with any individual organizations who supported you? Carol, go ahead.
Yes, well, I already mentioned the 4-H families, but I also partner with the Quilt of Valor Foundation, which is a national foundation. Combat veterans are presented with a Quilt of Valor that they can apply for online. I know the group leader in my area, and I helped her also get in touch with Greg Kucharewski, one of my Vietnam veterans, who runs a veterans group that has to do with fishing and helping PTSD and TBI veterans. And also the, let's see, what's a Valor? I know, the Monmouth University oral history class. The students, let's say there are 15 students, I will make up the paperwork and get the DVDs duplicated and send them off to the professor, Melissa Ziobro, who does a fabulous job supplying me with interns every year, every semester. So it's a symbiotic relationship that we have. And they do a wonderful job, not only doing your work as far as the audio video logs, but they also do work for my website, which is a summary. And what we do with the summaries are we include photos, we include links, we include obituary links, as well as any article links. Or let's say one of them wrote a blog that was in the New York Times. He was an Afghanistan veteran who we just posted to our website. We have a Facebook page. And that reminds me, I didn't get a chance to answer the question about how do you recruit veterans, but Facebook, I did get a Gulf War veteran through my own town's Facebook page. And also any social media, newspapers, articles about veterans. You'll see that coming up now with Veterans Day right around the corner. If you can't look up the veteran yourself, a lot of times their hometown will be mentioned, and you can just go online and find it, address.com. And you can also go through the reporter who wrote the article and identify yourself and say, could you pass my information along to the veteran?
Hey, thank you very much, Carol. Susan, how about you? Have you worked with any organizations?
Well, in the beginning was when I was working with the Park Service or doing that project for them. One of the things, it's not required, but people at the battlefield, there's also a historical archive. They wanted transcriptions, and I got in touch with the National Court Reporters Association in Washington. And again, I know that wasn't required, but by contacting them, because I did have some volunteers that actually transcribed when I did an interview, and I found that having a hand professionally at a highest level, which I felt the court reporters, to just type it up. I'm used to doing that in the field, but that's not the same thing as doing an hour or more interview. So I did meet some of the court reporters, but the National Court Reporters Association, because they partner with the Veterans History Project, have been a long time supporter, I believe. It's students when if they can get credits like continuing education credits, or they can get a student membership by transcribing interviews. So knowing that through the Court Reporters Association, I visited a School of Court Reporting here in Atlanta and met with the students and did a presentation. And two of the students also transcribed some of the interviews, but as a teacher, because I have also taught high school and college level, I would like to do more of that, because students were so interested. They said they knew someone, they were very interested in wanting to interview and use their skills in conjunction with helping with an interview. So partnering with the Court Reporters Association, and then now I'm working with senior centers and also some of the Marine Corps, different groups, more word of mouth, that have my name, and I come to their meetings, and so I go that way. But I'm newer to this than you all, so I'm building those things up.
Thank you very much, Susan. Hey, so you alluded to the transcript. Do you guys have a special process as far as what you do after the interview is conducted? Is there a routine? Is there a certain way that you kind of organize that information before you send it to the library? Would anybody like to answer that question? Yeah, Carol, go ahead.
Okay, so I create a DVD on my computer, which is not what I did before Hurricane Sandy, when everything got washed away. I used to have a TV in my office and a DVD recorder. So one of the skills would be you need to be adaptable. You need to become flexible and learn new technology and learn software programs. You need to be brave. You need to put yourself out on a limb, and if you're in a parking lot and you see the veteran with the cap on their head, you walk up to them and you say, you have a story to tell, and your family deserves to have that legacy, and it's a treasure. And carry your card around, or a brochure or something to give them.
Okay. Hey, thank you very much, Carol. Susan, you'd like to answer that as well?
What's recently happened, is that other veterans, they wanted to get those transcriptions. So it was almost 2 years since I finished some of the interviews that hadn't been transcribed, and they formed a group connected with the National Park Service with the Kennesaw Mountain, formed a nonprofit. They do other things. It's Friends of Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield, and one of their first things is they wanted to get the transcriptions, raise money, and for it. And I, as a volunteer to them, I have all the digital files, and I said I will handle all the technical, because that's, you need to have all those records and things. Well, I maintain those. But one thing that was really, I thought, remarkable is one of the interviews, Jay Haney, who went to West Point, he was Vietnam. He donated the first amount of money to get the first interview done himself for Jim Bly, the veteran from Vietnam that had lost his leg. Because that was kind of the first, I wanted to get his done. That I knew that was a real important one to get done. And so one veteran donated the money for another veteran, which I thought was amazing. And then they ended up coming up with all the money, and we got all 16 of the all the other interviews transcribed. I've just recently finished it, and I'll be sending PDFs to everybody. I don't know the hard copy, but anyway, the transcriptions, people are happy to. It's not an. I don't edit it. The transcription is simply, it's a rough verbatim of the. So if there's hesitation, but it gives them at least something to refer to if they want to. So some of them are writing books now. Some of the veterans that I've talked to are doing more things. So that. But I just thought that they were so proud of that transcription. So that's leading me into more things. But I need to keep my records really good. So that's. I just wanted to tell you that, because I thought that was pretty cool about the transcriptions of other veterans supporting each other, and then just the community coming together for this to get it done. So
Hey, well, thank you so much, Susan. Hey, and that kind of leads to my next question. So I guess conducting the interview is in of itself an honor to many. But did anyone confer other honors, or were there other attributes that came thereafter to the veterans when you were finished? I think Carol mentioned a luncheon. Susan was mentioned, with the community. Would anybody like to add anything to that? Jonas, did you do anything as far as honoring the veterans, or what? Did you do something after the interview was conducted?
Yes, sir. So I guess the smallest and most thing I did was I invited them all to my Eagle Scout ceremony. And at the end of the ceremony, as this being my main project, I had them all come up and how do I say this? I guess I could say honored them all at the end of the ceremony and showed everyone who I interviewed. I guess. Yes.
That's awesome, Jonas. That's fantastic. Would anybody else like to add to that? Yes, Jeff, go ahead.
For 8 years in a row, we held a Welcome Home Hot Springs Village Vietnam Veterans Day luncheon, and would have a speaker. I don't know if you know the name Anita Deason, who's the military assistant to Senator John Bozeman in Arkansas. That's an example of who we would have come and talk. So we would get them all together, and as the rest of you probably know, it's great to get the veterans together because that's who they're most comfortable talking with, in my opinion, at least. And at one of those luncheons, another fellow that helped me out with it, we got challenge coins made. It said, welcome home, Hot Springs Village, Vietnam veterans, and it had, like a Vietnam medal ribbon on the backside. And as we handed those out, I think there were 159 people there, but half of those were veterans because we let them bring a spouse or significant other. I bet you 50% of them cried when they went through the line. It meant that much to them that you acknowledged them, and that, especially for the Vietnam guys who came home to such terrible treatment, it really meant something. And I think that's one thing that kept me going for so many years to do these, all by myself, really, was I knew how much it meant to them. I remember my wife was at a Subway once, and there was a Vietnam vet in there, and he said, aren't you Jeff's wife? And she said, yeah. And he said, well, I wanted you to know and tell Jeff that I went to see my psychiatrist, and I told him about my interview, and he told me that interview probably did me more good than the 3 years I've been going to see him. So it means a lot to them. And that was really an impetus for me to just keep doing them year after year after year. I was doing up to 40 a year. 48, I think, was the most I did in 1 year. So that's almost one a week for a year. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you for sharing that. That was tremendous. That was.
Korea, World War II luncheon on Pearl Harbor Day. And if I can I have 1 more minute?
Absolutely.
Okay, I wanted to mention something about that Carol mentioned about when you see the cap, talk to them. I did 4 honor flights where you take the World War II veteran to D.C. and back from Arkansas. And we're in Reagan International, and we're on our way home, and I was guardian for 3 World War II vets, and they went into the bathroom. And another guardian came up with a guy in a wheelchair, and he said, would you watch Mr. Baird while I use the restroom? And I said, sure. And I looked down at him, and he's got a hat on, and it says the USS Hornet. And I said, sir, you were on the Hornet? He said, yeah. And I said, were you on the Hornet for the Doolittle raid? He said, I saw all 16 of them take off. And, I didn't know that guy from Adam. He didn't live in our town, but he lived nearby. And we got home, and I could not get that guy out of my mind. So I contacted the Honor Flight program, found out where he lived. He had never told his story to anybody. And he served on the Hornet when it was sunk, and it was one of the most memorable, unreal interviews I did. So as Carol says, when you see that hat, don't be afraid to ask.
Have any of you been to the Library of Congress, to the Veterans History Project office, and have taken, either a tour yourself or with veterans that you've interviewed? Okay, I don't see any hands up. So as a moderator, I'm just going to say it's very worthwhile. I usually take my students on a bus trip, and we invite veterans along. And the staff at the Veterans History Project have given us an amazing tour, and I think it's very worthwhile. Besides going to all the great memorials that are down in DC, it's definitely worth taking the time to see where these collections are permanently going to be staying. So, hey, thank you very much. Okay, so my next question is for everybody. Did any of you find that you had changed or grown after the interview? That maybe 1 or 2 of these interviews that you conducted, or several, did any of you find that you had grown or changed after the interview? Would anybody like to answer that? Okay, Susan, go ahead.
Well, I think every interaction with people I grow, but in particular with the Veterans History Project, because this is focused service. Even though I've been out of the country a lot, I have a high regard for anyone who signs that line, because they don't know where they're going when they do that. And even though my dad was in the Navy, I really didn't learn about the nitty-gritty. I mean, the emotions. I've learned more from sitting and listening to so many different perspectives, that now I feel the way I've changed is things coming more to light. Like you said, there's a lot of things I've studied out of the textbook and read history and know facts. And I've lived abroad a lot, where I could listen to people where World War II is taking place. But I think what's changed me on this is it's just real. It's a lot. It's very personal, but it's also where we live, where we're from, and I feel like I'm getting deeper into to be even understanding I'm the youngest of 5. So my dad retired, but I'm understanding even a lot more about my own life. Growing up, my father from Brooklyn, New York, Italian, all this. I heard stories, but until I started really listening to family members, because that's a whole nother side of it. The family members, like you said, when you're a kid, you just keep listening to the same stories. But I feel like by listening and then talking with family members, it makes me reflect back on even more things to understand about my parents and all the moving around and things that they did and things that happened growing up. So I think that's something I wasn't expecting, because I'm always trying to learn new things. But in interviewing veterans, I'm actually going deeper into myself on a level, because of growing up in a Navy family and Sanford Naval Air Station, where I grew up in Sanford, Florida. There's just a lot of things that I hadn't really, it's surfacing. So just like the veterans' memories, sometimes you hit a nerve. I find a a lot's come up that's made it. I think that's what's made it so it's enriching to me as well. As you know what you're doing. The families appreciate it, the veterans appreciate it. But I think it's a really good question when you say how we change. It's brought up some new things for me that I hadn't, that I'm finding very gratifying. So.
Thank you very much, Susan. Jeff, I saw your hand. You wanted to answer that question as well?
Yeah, it just changed me. I mean, I learned more about the war because you get the real personal side of it. I had even a deeper understanding of service and the courage it took to fly a B-24 through a flak field, and there's nothing you can do about it. You just keep going and hope to God they don't hit you, and there's the guy on the right, and down he goes. You just keep on going, and the courage I mean, I realized he didn't have a choice. He couldn't turn around and fly away, but I mean, just their experiences were just incredible, time after time.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Yes, my father actually has some flak that he turned into a tie clip, and if he had turned the other way, it literally would have come up and killed him. So he's fortunate to have made his 35, and I'm fortunate to be here myself. But yes, we can relate to that. So this question is for Jonas. Do you feel you have any new skill sets to add to your belt after conducting these interviews?
Definitely, sir. I'd say the number one would be actively listening. Because sometimes when I'm talking to certain people, my mind can go elsewhere. But with this project, I knew I had to be focused on listening to these amazing stories. And just doing that really opened up my mind and allowed me to just understand more of what these people have experienced, what they've gone through, and how that can change me and help me as a person. And definitely organization, because as I said before, this does have some paperwork, and that was some stuff I wasn't used to. So that better organization was something that I've acquired along the way, sir.
All right. Hey, thank you, Jonas. Why should an individual volunteer to conduct veteran interviews on behalf of the Veterans History Project? Carol?
Can become a part of someone's family history as far as you will impact their lives if you can get the story out there on the internet, put it on your website, put it on a Facebook page for your organization. It's important that you do as much as you can with the interview instead of just putting it on a shelf. The interview to me is a living, breathing thing, and it needs to be out there so that others can find it. They'll find their late father's unit and say, there's someone still alive from their unit, and they'll reach out and email me and say, can I talk to him? And I'll say, sure. And I set it up. These are real stories. And I set it up, and they talked for an hour. My favorite veteran, Jerry Sampoli, God bless him. And he said he couldn't really remember her father, but then he went to sleep that night, and he remembered the guy was marching behind him, and this is true, and he would yell out the cadence, and it kind of just came back to him who her father was. So you're impacting lives by conducting the Veteran History Project. There's so much research that can be done later. A lot of the children don't even know that the interview was done. So you have an extra copy, you have a duplicator, you can make a copy, or if the Library of Congress has digitized it, you can send a link, which is even easier. Just email the link.
Thank you very much, Carol, for that answer. Would anybody else like to answer that? Go ahead, Jeff.
Again, going along with Carol, and I have not met before. I keep referring to Carol, but along with one of your comments there, I remember about getting the interviews out on the internet and so on, and of course our newspaper would do that. And I remember once I interviewed a man by the name of Joe Lauber, who was a stevedore in the Philippines, and he told the story of he was giving signals to a crane operator, and somehow he hurt his foot just before it was his time to stand closer to the hatch where things went down. So he went off and got taken care of, and the guy who took his place fell down through the hatch and was crushed. And that could have been Joe Lauber had he not had to go off to the infirmary. Well, about 2 weeks later, I got an email, Carol, like you had mentioned, from a guy in New York. I didn't know who this was, but in the story, it mentioned the 200th Port Company. And this guy said he Googled the 200th Port Company and 3 things came up, and one was our story. And to make a long story short, the guy that fell down through the hatch was his uncle. So he knew he died in the war, but he didn't know how or where.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Would anybody else like to answer that? Okay, we're going to go on to the next question. What advice would you give to someone who is thinking about conducting interviews? Where should they begin? So what advice would you give to someone thinking about conducting interviews? Where should they begin? Let's begin with Carol.
Where should they begin? They need to find the veteran, which I already said before. You go to the newspapers, social media. Jeff had mentioned you go to the VFWs. Veterans are everywhere. They're in the supermarket. And we talked about that they wear their caps with pride that say which war they were in. Sometimes you can even tell if they're a certain age group when everyone was drafted and they were a veteran. You can tell. You can just, your first question would be, can I just ask you, are you a veteran? And they'll be very surprised to hear that if they're not wearing the cap. And your passion for this work will show through, that you're interested, and that you're having a conversation because they feel like no one's interested because no one's asking them anything. And that has to also go with what I said earlier about the families. They don't ask because they don't want to hurt their loved one, because they know it must be painful that they never talked about it. So another thing you can do is you need to get their information first. You don't want someone who was on a ship and you're asking them, so where were you on this day and where did your ship go next? You'll know all that because research is so easy to do. But what they'll fill in are their eyewitness accounts. They'll fill in the first person historical source that they are. And that's what you want. They'll remember if it was night or day, they'll remember the weather, the terrain. You want all of that. You want a vivid description of what they were going through. And like Jeff said too earlier, if when the guy looked up at the ceiling, you want them to go back there because that's how you're getting the authentic story from them. And when they go back there, you know that you got a true, authentic interview and that you were a success. And that's the best thing that you can do. And also with the interruptions, you give a little, you show them before the interview, we're going to do a little timeout signal if you want me to stop, and it won't show. I'm only filming your head and shoulders, that kind of thing. And they're completely comfortable. And you also say in the beginning, this is painless. It's a conversation. It'll be very easy. So just sit back, relax. In fact, don't even press the record button yet until they sit back. And you have a bottle of water there for them, and just have them relax. And you start with who served in your family before you, and they'll go through family legacy of, maybe the Civil War, probably not, but some of them do know their genealogy, and then you go from there.
Okay. Hey, thank you very much, Carol. How about you, Susan? What were you going to say?
Well, two things. I wanted to make a comment, but I also wanted to ask, I don't know if I'm able to do this for others, like when you give the paper, because you do have to document, the paperwork, the signed release for the library, for the Veterans History Project, and their little bio. And I was wondering if you'd all do that in the very beginning before you even schedule the appointment, because sometimes that seems to keep people from participating. And then my second thing is we're talking about Vietnam vets, but also I find it harder to get younger, like Afghan, Iraq conflict veterans, the younger ones, and I wondered what your experiences are with that.
So, hey, great question. So I guess the first one was about the biographical data sheets. How many of you actually have those completed before you conduct the interview? Okay, so it looks like pretty much that's the majority. Jonas, do you also have the biographical data sheet completed before you begin the interview?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay, and it seems like it's a really good starting place as far as the research is concerned. So, you get that information and you can start planning and processing. And I know for my students, we use that as a starting point to write a 8 to 10 page research paper to get us started in the project so they have that background knowledge. And then the second one was about the, I guess, more recent wars or conflict veterans. Have many of you found it more difficult to have them volunteer to give their interviews, or not so much? Has anyone found anything? Jeff, go ahead.
I would say that the toughest for me, were the Vietnam veterans. I got more no's, no thanks from Vietnam veterans than anything. In terms of the war on terror, the more recent veterans, I find them kind of reluctant too, especially the ones that were in combat, or as several of them would use the phrase, chasing bad guys. Some of them were in real sensitive reconnaissance and heavy lifting, heavy duty stuff. Some of those guys really didn't want to go into much detail. Again, I think patience, and I know I'm being redundant, and I apologize, but be patient. They may give you a no. I've had guys that said, no, Jeff, appreciate your interest, but that's just not for me. And then 2 years later, they tell you everything. You just be patient. Develop a relationship with that person. You see them at other veteran-related events, and you go talk to them, and how you doing? Or you see them at a restaurant or whatever. Just stay in touch, and as you get to know them more, get to know them more, they open up.
Okay, thank you, Susan. And you were going to add something there. Go ahead.
Oh, I was only going to say that's where I'll have a conversation, and we have a conversation about it, and they're interested. And then I provide the piece of paper, and I go, "Could you fill this out for me?" And they just keep saying, "I don't get," they don't get around to it, or they just sit down and fill out the paperwork. So that kind of holds up. That's why I said I usually have a family member, or I've actually thought, and I welcome your thoughts, at the veterans, these groups, I've actually offered already to say, you know what, I'll come and bring paperwork, and we can make it a little workshop, and everybody can help you. Some of the vets that have already been interviewed might want to, we had planned to do that before COVID, but I thought, you know what, I'll back up to that part and maybe make that be part of one of their events, or because they meet a couple times a month for just activities at the local senior center. Do you all think that might be an option for some of the people to make it?
Okay. Hey, thank you very much. Hey, so Susan did a great job asking some questions that she had for the other panelists while we're having this discussion. Does anybody else on the panel have any other questions that they'd like to ask the other panelists? All right. Hey, hearing none, then I think we're getting close to the end of wrapping this up. So does anyone have any closing thoughts that they would like to share? I'm going to start with Jonas. What closing thoughts would you like to share, Jonas?
Well, first of all, I want to thank all of you for letting me be here. It's such an honor to just participate in this wonderful project. There's so many people who share the same interests that I do in keeping our nation's, the people who have kept our nation's freedom, keeping their experiences and making them well known. And it's just wonderful to see other people volunteering their time to do these things. And it's just a great honor to be a part of this. And I just want to thank you so much for letting me be a part of this.
Thank you very much, Jonas. Thank you. Susan, how about you?
I think same thing. It's an honor to be on the panel and get to meet other people. I feel like it's a lot of great ideas and support, and I want to go up and look for each one of you. When I get off of here, I hope I can get links to what you're doing and your journalism. But the teacher in me, I'm very interested. That's kind of where I'm leaving this. Is I see so much potential in the classroom because, like I said, I'm kind of old school. I've always liked stories, but when I recently taught at Georgia State and I taught 10th grade, I found that students weren't using libraries, they're digitalized, that they were just Googling. And so I think the Veterans History Project is an incredible platform. I mean, it's prepared, and to get to use it more for educating for students to maybe participate, interview somebody, and then that act, they understand what primary source information is, and they can, I think it will bring, they find people like stories. And I find that was hard, difficult for me, even with juniors and seniors at college level, but using a library, but when you can tie in and they can talk to somebody and they get credit for, whatever you have to do in classroom. I don't know what ages you're teaching, but that's something kind of I'm leading on. And Carol talked about interns. I really I'd love to continue doing it, the Veterans History Project, but tying it maybe more in to students and make it be an opportunity for them to learn skills and them to help, and learn really what primary information is, because I think it's, in this day and age with technology, it's even more important than ever is to talk to somebody and get their firsthand information. And then I think it'll help them be more their critical thinking and writing going forward, rather than just Googling and believing everything. So that's kind of where I'm leaving it. So all of you all have been an inspiration to me. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. How about Carol? Any final thoughts?
Yes, I want to thank Director Karen Lloyd and her staff for inviting me to be a part of this panel today. And also, I want to say thank you for gathering such a stellar group of fellow interviewers who I look forward to also keeping in touch with. You're welcome to share my email contact information with everyone. And I wanted to say that there is a way to sign up with my project on our museum website. Our webmaster did it so that the veterans can just fill out the form online. It comes straight to me, to my email address. That way, we don't have to wait for the mail to come with the old-fashioned hard copy of the application. So that is the fastest way to sign up. And I would say to everyone, just get out there and talk as much as you can to the different groups and tell them how cathartic it is to be interviewed, and contact the local assemblyman and order for free legislative resolutions, which can be personalized in your veteran's name, as well as provide their military information. And that's something that is frameable and that can also be kept forever by the family.
Thank you very much, Carol, for that. And finally, Jeff, any final thoughts?
Just to echo what Carol said, thanks for letting me be a part of this. It's a real honor to be a part of this. And I'm grateful for the Veterans History Project that there is a place for these interviews to be housed and preserved. Younger generations, I remember I taught a history class once, and they didn't know the Allies from the Axis. And, the youngsters we just don't teach history anymore, in my opinion. And so having these collections, I think is just a wonderful thing. And I think all of you that are at the Veterans History Project do a wonderful job, for which I'm grateful.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for those closing remarks. And I just want to say thank you to everyone on the panel. I think you guys did an amazing job today. I would also like to thank the Veterans History Project for hosting the panel. And to learn more about how you can participate, you can head to loc.gov/vets. And that's loc.gov/vets. And lastly, thank you to all you who tuned in today to learn more about how you can make history through a lasting contribution to the Veterans History Project.